So let's hear from Manitoba's premier on this law that I mentioned. Manitoba will weigh in on a controversial Quebec law that bans religious symbols for public sector workers. So here's where we're at right now. The Supreme Court of Canada has agreed to hear a legal challenge of the law, Bill 21. It became law in 2019 in Quebec. There has yet to be a date set, but last week, Manitoba's Attorney General Matt Wiebe filed an intervention to the Supreme Court. In it, he argued that courts should be able to declare whether laws like this violate the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, even the notwithstanding clause, the notwithstanding clause allows for governments to override certain protected rights. This is what Premier Wabkadu had to say about why his government intervened.
Well, I think there's an important constitutional question that needs to get settled. But I think on the face of it, here in Manitoba, we are not fans of Bill 21. We have turban-wearing Sikhs. We have Hutterites who wear headscarves, Muslims who wear hijabs, Christian people who wear the cross. And we have a lot of secular folks, a lot of atheists even, who are concerned with suspension of charter rights. So, just in that very direct way, we're standing up for people in our province and what we want our confederation, our Canadian public sphere to see reflected when it comes to this question about secularism and separation of church and state, but also importantly about the freedom of religion.
Jennifer Selby is here to help us understand all of what's happening. She's a professor of religion and culture and political science at Memorial University of Newfoundland, but she's originally from Winnipeg and she's been studying this. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Why is this law that's something that other provinces like ours, Manitoba, are concerned about? Can you give us the picture of how this could potentially impact us as Canadians overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would just highlight three things that the Premier Canoe just mentioned. First is about protecting visible and religious minorities. The bill or the law does not overtly speak about religious or visible minorities, but they are those who are primarily affected by the law. So that kind of visible difference in the public sphere, I think, matters to a lot of Canadians. The second is like a complex two solitudes, if you will, question about what is the project of Canada in terms of bilingualism, two settler colonial nations, provincial autonomy, and how does the charter fit into that? And then the third piece is about what is the acceptable employment of Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, especially if it's used repeatedly and renewed to trump Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
So let me dig into that last one because a lot of people don't really understand the notwithstanding clause. But what you're saying effectively in the backdrop of this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, if enough provinces use the notwithstanding clause to put a law like this in place, effectively, they're changing the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So then one might ask, how do we better protect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the face of this? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this Section 33, it allows the kind of some people call it a safety valve. Others have deemed it the nuclear option. So it kind of depends on what perspective you take, but it allows different jurisdictions, territories, provinces, even at the federal level, to trump, if you will, certain charter rights. Not all charter rights, but certain charter rights. So notwithstanding means kind of like in spite of a charter right. So in this case, although the Quebec government had attempted several times before Law 21 passed in 2019 to pass laws restricting religious signs in the public sphere, notably for, in this case, people in positions of authority with the provincial government. Despite that, it never passed because those laws were seen as going against religious freedom rights. So this notwithstanding clause is this kind of part of a complex question about, the Constitution of Canada, how that came about, and whether, what would happen if the Supreme Court of Canada decided to change that Constitution. It could open up a constitutional debate. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's about more than just this particular law, but this particular law is important as well.
And if we look at this particular law, obviously Manitoba an intervener, but some other provinces as well, and the Supreme Court will hear this. We don't have a date yet, as I said. So if they are
Yes.
going to hear this and they actually agree with those who have intervened here, does that mean that Quebec can't have this law within their province? What does that mean?
I guess that's ultimately what it could mean. They have, the law passed in 2019. More than 5 years have passed since then. And so the law was renewed. The notwithstanding clause in Quebec was successfully renewed. And the law has gone through 2 appeals in Quebec already before reaching the Supreme Court. So, it's unclear. Certainly the Coalition Avenir Québec, the leading provincial party at the moment, they are in a way doubling down. They recently, commissioned a report that introduces 50 new recommendations.
Yeah, they want to expand this.
To go further. Yeah, exactly. So there is a way in which things are heating up, and there is a kind of polarization that's happening on this question, I think, in Quebec and the rest of Canada.
So when this came up, I just want to make this clear to people. We have one of the largest French-speaking as well. Not that this is about language, but we have one of the largest French-speaking communities outside Quebec. So I actually went to St. Boniface in 2019 to talk to a bunch of residents there just about how they would feel about something like this and being in Canada, just to get their point of view on this, because people would lean into what is developing in Quebec. As part of your research, you interviewed people impacted by the law already there.
Yeah.
What did you hear from people?
Yeah, so I've done 2 studies that have looked at Law 21 from different perspectives. The first one in which I interviewed as part of a larger project looking at Algerian immigration, Algerians who live in Montreal. And there are women in particular, again, racialized, so people who are visibly different and are seen as Muslim, whether or not they are a Muslim, are certainly impacted by that. So I'm thinking of one of my participants, of the 65 women I interviewed, who came to Quebec really with the idea of a promise of difference, chose Quebec and not France, because France has very rigorous laws that have been in place now for more than 20 years that really reduce religion in the public sphere. So chose Montreal, came to Quebec, enrolled in an education program in her 4th year, and now at a stage in which she is grandfathered through the education system, so she's allowed to complete her degree as a woman who wears hijab, but can never teach in the public school system in Quebec. And so that's a very challenging situation, I think, for a number of women in particular. And the data show that, many of my participants talked about wanting to leave Quebec and seeking to leave, but quantitative data show that very few people are actually leaving Quebec, because it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to with your families and, people who are in different socioeconomic situations to leave Quebec and for language reasons. So, so there's a definite tremendous impact, and more than just on particular individuals, let's say in education or in policing or in positions of authority that
Any
are
other
impacted by the law.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't extend to all public employees, but just to people in positions of authority. But though it extends, it creates a kind of ambiance, if you will, in which people who wear visible religious signs feel surveilled. There's more overt expressions of hate. So people are kind of emboldened, if you will.
I'm slightly short on time, but I do have one additional quick question just for clarity. It extends to people in authority. So I might have been mistaken when I'm talking about public school teachers, all of them. Would it just be the principal or the superintendent?
You're not mistaken. You're not mistaken at all. Teachers, this is one of the controversial bits of that section or Article 6 of the law, is that teachers were included
as positions of authority. Okay.
And now there's a move to extend that to daycare workers as part of a new recommendation that came out at the end of August. And also, I wanted to also mention Article 8 of Law 21 that gets a lot less attention, and that it limits the reception and receiving of public services for all those who wear full-face veils or niqabs.
Lots to talk about, Jennifer. Thank you very much for weighing in this morning. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for your attention to this matter.
Jennifer Selby is a professor of religion and culture and political science at Memorial University of Newfoundland. She's a former Winnipegger. She's been studying this. So to read more about the story and Manitoba intervening on this law that has gone to the Supreme Court now, and Manitoba, one of the interveners. It's a law out of Quebec. If you want to read more about it, you can go to cbc.ca for the national story, and for local coverage of what our premier said last week about it, cbc.ca/Manitoba.